Hey guys, Carla again, founder and CEO of Ignite Your Learning. We're going to go through paragraph 3 for Othello, looking at the fall of the hero. So this is where it all comes together at the end, and we are utterly horrified by Othello's fall from grace. So in this particular one, the final scenes are key. So, looking at Othello's ultimate downfall and his realization that he has been deceived. And what's so awful about this is that he ends up proving the racial expectations of him right, which is that he is violent, he's irrational, and he's, murdered his wife, and, it's horrible. That being said, so there's kind of two perspectives we're going to look at. We're going to look at this from sort of a 16th century perspective, and then we're going to look at this from a 21st century perspective, which is kind of what I've been doing the whole way through the essay. And as I mentioned in the previous videos, when you're looking at the structure of this, you want to go in sort of like a linear fashion, looking at the tracking of the hero. So the falling of the hero. So you've got, we had, Othello is this like respected general, and then we had the fact that he was deceived, and now we've got the fact that it's all gone to waste. Swear, but maybe I won't. So Othello commits a monstrous act of murdering Desdemona. He becomes a murderous coxcomb, a fool. So if you think back to that video that I created about paragraph 1, or even the initial one about context, there was this expectation of, men of color being, like kind of honorable, but then also like, mentally kind of, foolish, or able to be deceived or manipulated, which I think is bizarre because we all have that. But anyway, so that's what sort of comes out at the end. So he murders her, and then it gets revealed that he's been deceived this whole time, and that's when he's the fool. And then what you see here is like this really raw emotion. Like, you can't even imagine how he must feel at realizing what he's done. And I mentioned this before too, but there's almost like a mismatch between what happened, like what his flaw was, which was that he couldn't see things clearly and that he was going to be deceived, and then the outcome of that, which is him murdering his beloved wife. And when he realizes what he's done, it's just so emotional. So like, oh, cursed slave. That's the technique called apostrophe. He's sort of like, he's addressing curses and slaves like as if they're there. They're not actually there, but it's just like a swear, oh, cursed slave, whip me, ye devils, from the possession of this heavenly sight, blow me out in winds, roast me in sulfur, wash me in he's just like so self-deprecating. So like he's lost everything. He's lost himself, and he's just hysterical. Oh, Desdemona, dead, oh, like he's just, almost not even making sense. It trails off at some point. So look, I've said sympathy emerges for Othello, but consider whether or not actually in that time the audience would have been sympathetic, because in a sense this kind of aligned with what they thought he was going to be like, because he's African. So unfortunately, what does happen at the end is, he just kind of comes back to that, expectation, which is very typical of Shakespeare's plays. Like, although he sort of does play around with conventions, he always comes back to the status quo at the end. He restores the order. And like that just really gave his audience a sense of security in a way, that they could, sort of what they believe is right, and that everything's going to be fine as long as they like stick to those, stringent beliefs and values. And so that's what happens here. Othello kind of proves all of those, so those stereotypes. And then, and so in terms of the idea of the sympathy, they may not have been sympathetic, but we definitely are. Like, as a modern responder, you just feel awful for the poor guy. Like he's already kind of got these racial stereotypes that keep him like limited, and then obviously you've got this guy who pretended to be helping him and then wasn't at all, was the one bringing him down, in fact. He describes himself as one whose hand like a base Indian threw a pearl away. And, you know, that's such a good quote, because when he has that simile comparing himself to a base Indian, like, it really reveals his indignity and like the racial, he's almost just aligning himself with the racial stereotypes of the time. He's uncivilized, he's the base Indian, you know, whereas he was valiant Othello before. So that's awful. Like, he himself, you know, turns himself into that. Obviously Desdemona is the metaphorical pearl that he's just thrown away. Like, he just couldn't value it, he couldn't see its value, and then it's lost. Then he suicides. I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. So the animalistic motif, he's the dog that is now smoted. And that's, you know, that's quite inhuman, and continues that animalistic notion we've talked about, particularly from a racial prejudice standpoint. And then I've just put a note here about catharsis. So, and that's kind of what we're talking about with the sympathy before. So although this would have provided a catharsis for an Elizabethan audience, where restoration of Othello's rightful place is restored, and what that means is that he's the base Indian. That's what's restored. Ironic, but and he's taken out of the picture. It's really unsettling for a modern audience, because we witness Othello's tragic fall, which is not only as a result of his human blindness, which, you know, is something we all share, but also the racial constructs that subjugate him. Like, he's right from the outset, we see that discrimination that he is subjected to, and then, you know, ultimately, you know, he has his awful downfall. So, you know, and this is one of the biggest reasons for why this has, you know, remains relevant from one audience. Like, as awful as it is to watch this poor guy, like, that this is so relevant from modern day, because there are so many injustices and, you know, prejudices towards not only people of color, but things like interracial marriages and notions of equality and whatever, that, you know, still we don't have that equality in so many ways, which is something that, you know, we really need to move towards. And by looking at these kind of texts, it's a really good way for us to understand how our views have been shaped by these particular stereotypes. So anyway, that's how you want to kind of finish it up. And so hopefully what you can see is there's a really cohesive structure here, where you've got beginning, middle, and end. And so if they pick a particular extract or part, you really covered everything. The only thing I haven't mentioned too much is the idea of women. And if you did want to talk about gender roles, which I think is a really great thing to talk about here, because there are places where women kind of challenge those. So I think that's kind of cool. And if actually Iago manipulates the stereotype of women to be the evil ones, or the manipulative and the, like devious, and that's very much linked to kind of Adam and Eve, where Eve was the one who got Adam kicked out of the Garden of Eden because she got deceived by the serpent and ate the apple and got Adam to do it, and so humanity was all lost. Eve, like, you can't trust women. And what's so ironic here is that Iago uses that stereotype of not being able to trust women to manipulate Othello. So what he kind of starts saying is that, oh, you can't be trusted. Desdemona deceived her father. She's going to do it to you. He actually even refers to Desdemona as being the metaphorical net that will enmesh them all. So when he talks about what his plan's going to be, it comes to like she is the key part. So I think that could go really well as the middle paragraph, the paragraph 2, in alignment with Iago's deceit. You could also talk about the way that he manipulates those roles of women. But actually what ends up coming about is that the women were telling the truth the whole time and it wasn't them at all. So so anyway, some interesting things that you could go into there, but I would slot that into, you could talk about that in the paragraph 2, and it certainly would relate in paragraph 3 as well, because obviously the women are the victims here as well. Othello's action to murder his wife, if she had actually been sleeping with someone else, probably would have been extremely justified. But yeah, either way, she was a victim because she was never doing any of that. So that's probably the other key thing that maybe they could give you, like if they gave you an extract, you'd need to integrate that. But outside of that, like, this really should cover everything. So what we're going to do now is have a look at some essay questions. So if we look at the first one, Shakespeare's play Othello interrogates man's capacity for power, deceit, and self-destruction. To what extent does this perspective align with your understanding of the play? So when you're analyzing an essay question, and always analyze an essay question, don't just start writing, because you will not answer it properly. Trust me, I've been doing this for 18 years. I know. So when you want to look at, when you're looking at an essay question, underline the key word. So we've got Othello interrogates man's capacity, power, deceit, self-destruction, and then really go and have a look at how those link to each of points of your argument. So if we have a look at, the first paragraph we were talking about, Othello is, he's powerful initially, and he does have a capacity for power, but then you've also got the power of racial stereotypes to shape people's views. The power of Iago and Brabantio's prejudice towards Iago specifically, because he's the one that causes the downfall, but to cause the self-destruction of Othello. So now I'm starting to touch into the other ones too. But if we have a look, wow, this actually works so well. I didn't even pick this question based on the structure, but it just fit, and they all do. They fit in really well. So the next one obviously being deceit, looking at Iago and the fact that he exploits Othello's fatal flaw, his capacity to be deceived, his blindness, in order to bring him down. And then bring into the next one, self-destruction. So Othello self-destructs as a result of the fact that he, doesn't have the ability to see through the deceit, and he loses all of his power, and he has that downfall. So wow, that worked really well. So thinking through each paragraph and linking it to the words of the question is so valuable. Then you go and write your introduction, because if you just start writing, you don't really think about how it links, then it won't work to the same degree. The other thing I want to be really clear about, never memorize an essay. You hear that a lot, but what you do need to do is have a structure ready, have a structure that works. And that's what I've been talking about here. Have your examples, make sure it's all cohesive, then practice lots and lots of questions, and make sure that you can use your material to the different answers. But when they say don't memorize an essay, they're saying don't memorize an introduction, write it from scratch. Don't memorize topic sentences, write them from scratch. Use the words of the question and integrate them into your argument. So if you're looking at paragraph 1 here and you're kind of trying to come up with a topic sentence, you'd say something like, Shakespeare interrogates man's capacity for power in as we talked about, in the way that Othello does have this powerful position. So Othello's capacity for power as a general, however, the power of the racial stereotypes in this era prevent him from, kind of fully realizing a sense of equality, where, obviously, as we say, he tries to kind of marry Desdemona. Well, he does marry Desdemona, but that does not end well for him or anybody. So, write your topic sentences from scratch, write your introduction from scratch and your conclusion, and then make sure that you kind of have those words throughout your response from the question, and that's key to getting a top-down response. Next one, despite the striking portrayals of goodness and nobility, the play Othello leaves the audience with a sense of dismal despair. So very similar, we talked about the nobility at the open, the goodness. Maybe you could talk about, Othello, and there was like a purity of their relationship or whatever, but then that doesn't kind of last. He is exploited. Goodness could also come in that idea of like Othello being trusting, and that being his his fatal flaw, his Marcia, and then the sense of dismal despair is his tragic downfall, the catharsis. And again, like as we talked about from a contextual standpoint, maybe the audience at the time wouldn't have been left with a sense of dismal despair. Maybe they would have been left with this satisfaction that everything's been returned back to the status quo, the typical expectations of society. But for a modern audience, certainly dismal despair, and definitely for Othello, dismal despair. Cool. And then, Othello's murder of Desdemona is a result of his weaknesses and circumstances rather than Iago's malice. Yeah, maybe. But again, you can see how you can easily link this into all the parts of the structure that we talked about. His weaknesses being blindness, circumstances, racial prejudices, malice, etc. So there you go. Hopefully that helps you in terms of not only developing a structure for your essay, but make sure you practice lots of questions once you have something ready. Practice, practice, practice. Time yourself. Gosh, it's so important because, you know, if you only got 40 minutes, it's like nothing. You know, you could have maybe 8 or 9 quotes from the play, and you know, you've got to make sure you answer the question, and you've got a limited time to write. So a lot to do in 40 minutes, but hopefully this kind of simplifies it and gives you an approach that can be very versatile regardless of the questions you get. Hope you liked it.